Everybody, it's Logan, aka Suburban Yinzer. So in this video, I'm going to be asking the question, could the Confederates have won the Battle of Gettysburg? So I'm reading this book called Gettysburg, A Testing of Courage by Noah Andre Trudeau. It's ultimately like a play-by-play, very complex, detailed play-by-play of the Battle of Gettysburg. It's about, it's like 600 pages. So it's a brick, okay? It's not for the amateur reader, if you know what I mean. But ultimately, could the Confederates have won the Battle of Gettysburg? As you can see, I'm a very loyal, devoted Confederate supporter of my ancestors of Virginia, the Army of Northern Virginia. And I have ancestors that not only fought and served for the 19th Virginia Volunteer Infantry Regiment, but also the first Volunteer Infantry Regiment of Virginia. And many other regiments too. My ancestors for Virginia, my mom's ancestors, were heroic, Blue Ridge Mountain, patriots, descended from the American Revolution. So when they were coming up to Gettysburg, and they fought July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 1863, it was ultimately decisive. It was the most decisive, important battle of the Civil War, and they all knew it. Both sides, not just the Confederates, but also the Union. But every time I watch the movie Gettysburg, 1993, and I know that a lot of it is fictional, but a lot of it is non-fictional. I understand it's based on history, of course. But when I read The Killer Angels, and I watch the Battle of Gettysburg, the movie Gettysburg, and I watch Pickett's Charge, for example, even the whole movie, but especially like July 2nd, July 3rd, so Little Round Top, and then I watch Pickett's Charge. I'm sitting on the edge of my seat, thinking to myself, come on, break the line, Longstreet, do it. You know what I mean? I'm always rooting for the Gray, because I want them to win. But as a Pennsylvania boy, descended from both Keystone Staters and Virginians, being from Pennsylvania, I ultimately have to root for their home team because my dad's side of the family, my dad's ancestors fought for the 74th Pennsylvania, 11th Corps. And then my mother's ancestors, her other ancestors, Keystone Staters, fought for the 126th Pennsylvania, the 209th Pennsylvania, and the 29th Pennsylvania. So I'm just, I'm ultimately just both sides. Okay, let's just call me blue and gray. But as for the Confederates, on that aspect, of that point of view, ultimately, General Lee is always slandered, and he's always being defamed as some stupid leader, some stupid leader, commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, to say that, oh, you were dumb for trying to do that, for trying to march across a whole open field during Pickett's Charge, July 3rd, 1863, and break the solidified line of the Army of the Potomac. What were you thinking, Lee? You're stupid. No, he wasn't. You got to understand the decisive aspects and details and scenarios that he was trying to think as a military genius, a military strategist. You got to put yourself in the shoes of the history of the people themselves on the battlefield. It's quite easy for me to sit in the back of my car right now in the studio, as I call it, and my nice, comfortable, surroundings, and open my book and say, "Oh, General Lee, you are an idiot, sir." You know what I mean? Come on. Quit being stupid. This isn't 2026. This is 1863 we're talking about. And General Lee on July 3rd, or July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, was put into a very difficult position. He is in enemy territory. He is in foreign territory. He has the Union on the ropes. He knows if he wins the Battle of Gettysburg, if General Lee wins this battle, it's ultimately over for the Union. They are going to lose not only domestically in the political aspect, but also internationally on the foreign aspect. You have to win this battle. Now, when people try to slander Lee and try to basically point fingers and say he's an idiot, quote unquote, they're trying to say that he didn't know what he was doing. So sending, these divisions across an open field on July 3rd, 1863, they're trying to say, well, that's just stupid. Why would he do that? Here's the thing. What other choices did Lee have? July 2nd was ultimately the most important and the most decisive time that Lee could have broke the Army of the Potomac, and he almost did multiple times. I mean, the Army of the Potomac, at the end of the day, at the Battle of Gettysburg, and I will admit this because I have ancestors from the 74th Pennsylvania and the 29th Pennsylvania that fought on Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. And I will admit this, as a Yankee, as somebody from PA, I will admit this. We got lucky, okay? Lee and the Confederates in general, my mother's ancestors in Virginia, they could have won that battle multiple times. The Union ultimately, at the end of the day, not saying that they didn't know what they were doing, but ultimately they occupied the high ground, which was pretty smart. But ultimately they got lucky, okay? Because on July 2nd, in the evening of July 2nd, going into the afternoon, evening of July 2nd, 1863, okay, you have the high ground, you have Cemetery Hill, you have Little Round Top and Cemetery Ridge. Of course, the Union occupies the high ground. They got the strategic defensive to be able to create some type of, we have the best ground, ground on the field, naturally. But what people don't understand in the modern aspect is that Lee was genius by hitting the south and the north of the battlefields, by hitting Little Round Top and then Cemetery Hill. You almost broke the line multiple times, and also hitting Cemetery Ridge in the evening. And thank God for the 1st Minnesota, or the line would have completely capitulated on July 2nd, essentially. So then, Lee knows, okay, the Union line on Cemetery Ridge is ultimately soft. They're very, very, very soft. There's weak points. And this was what July 2nd was about. It was about surveillance. It was about trying to get some reconnaissance to find out what kind of things are we dealing with here to be able to make a frontal major assault on the main line, Cemetery Ridge, because he already tried Little Round Top. He already tried Cemetery Hill. And my German ancestors on Cemetery Hill, the 11th Corps, specifically the 74th Pennsylvania, they ultimately did their job. Okay, they held Cemetery Hill. They withheld General Ewell's assault on Cemetery Hill. So ultimately, Lee has no other option but to send a full frontal assault and basically tell my ancestors, my mom's other ancestors of General Pickett, Longstreet's Corps, Pickett's division. He tells them, y'all got to go over there and break that line. You know what I mean? You got to go across that field, a mile open field, and break that line. Because he knows that Cemetery Ridge is ultimately going to break. It almost broke the night before. But ultimately, in my opinion, what really cost Lee that assault, Pickett, Pettigrew, and the Pickett, Pettigrew assault, or, charge, that's called Pickett's charge, essentially, that ultimately was broken by the artillery bombardment before the assault, essentially. They overshot, the Confederates overshot Cemetery Ridge. If they would have had a stronger, more precise assault on Cemetery Ridge, instead of directing your fire over on to Cemetery Hill, screw Cemetery Hill. Cemetery Hill is not your main concern. Focus all your fire on that center. And I understand most of the fire was on the center, was on Cemetery Ridge. But Cemetery Hill is not your main concern. Cemetery Ridge is your main concern. You want to focus all your assets, all your ammunition onto Cemetery Ridge, because that's what you're going to do. The copse of trees, the landmark, right? We all know. So once Lee does that, once he starts directing the artillery fire across the field and it overshoots, that ultimately just sets the plane. But what I'm not trying to do is I'm not trying to say, oh, Lee's an idiot. That was E. Porter Alexander. That was the artillery. Longstreet already was warning Lee about this, which ultimately Longstreet was right at the end of the day. But Longstreet wasn't gospel. Longstreet was not God. Okay, Lee is going to listen to his military advisor, his lieutenant general, but he's not going to say, oh, Pete, I'm not going to do it now because you told me to. Lee's smarter than this. Lee knows the decisive aspects of this battle. He knows the political military aspects of this. He knows how desperate it is to win this battle. He needs to do a full frontal assault. You need to do it. I know it's crazy to think in the modern aspect, in 2026, in the 21st century, They're stupid for doing that. Okay. This is 1863. Lee doesn't know that ultimately all of the artillery is going to withhold half of its ammunition for the assault because they know it's coming. Lee thinks that the ammunition is out. He thinks that the Union has been basically engaged all of its ammunition and they ran out. That's a lie. Okay? And he doesn't know that. We know that as the historian. We know that as the 21st century people were, yes, of course. We know that now. But did Lee know that at the time on July 3rd, 1863? No, he did not. So when we slander and we say he's walking against a full mile of open ground, what an idiot. He doesn't know that. So when they finally open up on Pickett's division, Pettigrew's division, and Trimble's division, I forgot Trimble too, Pickett, Pettigrew, Trimble charge. When he opens up on these divisions, Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and Little Round Top, all these artillery opening up on him on this open mile long from Seminary Ridge to Cemetery Ridge across this open mile landscape. Ultimately, we know in retrospect, looking back on it, reading our books in our comfortable environments of the 21st century, we know, it was a disaster. But we don't know, but Lee did not know, and the Confederate High Command did not know on the field of battle, they did not know that this assault was doomed from the beginning, before it even happened. But in my personal opinion, looking back on it, not only watching the movie, because it's a movie, but reading the historical context, reading the texts, reading the books, studying the maps, I know that at the end of the day, they could have broke the line, and they almost did. But if you look at the mile long, if you ever walked Pickett's charge, Pickett, Trimble, Pettigrew charge, you know how daunting and how exhausting that task was. By the time they even got to the stone wall, by the time they even got to the copse of trees, they already lost a majority of their men. I mean, it was already a slaughter. So it's ultimately, yes, they could not have won the Battle of Gettysburg. But it's not like Lee could have lost it either. He could have won it. You know what I mean? If we look back on July 1st, yes, the Union takes the high ground. Yes, they've already taken the decisive action. They've already taken the high ground. But the battle's not over. And Lee knows July 1st, July 2nd, July 3rd, the enemy is there. The enemy is here. I'm not going to withdraw. I'm not going to retreat. I need to win this battle. I'm in enemy territory. I'm in foreign territory. I'm in the Union. I have to win the war right now. The political and military aspects are decisive for now. Gettysburg, that is the pinnacle. That is the tip of the spear. And Lee knows that, and so does Meade. General Meade, General Lee, both armies know. You lose this battle, you lose the war. So ultimately, Lee has to take all that gamble. He has to take the big gamble, the big risk of throwing everything he can at the Union at this battle at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And he loses that gamble. He loses that bet, which ultimately we know in the 21st century, he loses the war. But we cannot slander and say that Lee's an idiot, that he's stupid. He should have listened to Longstreet. Longstreet was right the whole time. We know that now. But did Lee know that with all of the aspects, with all of the scenarios and all of the principles and all of the examples falling onto his shoulders as the commander? We don't know what he was thinking. We ultimately know now that he loses, but he had to take that gamble. The fate of his country, the fate of Virginia, the fate of the Confederacy in general, is based on who wins and who loses Gettysburg. So ultimately, he has to throw everything he can at the Union to win this battle. He does it on July 1st, July 2nd, and July 3rd. In my opinion, in principle, Lee wins that battle. If you take the fantasy part of it, if you sympathize with the Confederacy like I do, you have to give him credit where credit is due. You have to give Lee credit, and Lee is a military genius in this aspect. Not to say that General Meade of the Army of the Potomac is an idiot either, because General Meade knows that General Meade is a conservative, reserved Pennsylvanian, okay, and he ultimately outthinks and outsmarts Lee. Granted. But does that make Lee a stupid idiot at the Battle of Gettysburg? No. That just means that you have two very smart, very reserved, and very cunning leaders. Okay? In that time period. So ultimately, yes, the Confederates could have won the Battle of Gettysburg. Should they have won? Yeah. Yeah, I wish. Okay, looking back on it, watching the movie, studying the history in retrospect, in the back of my car, reading the book, or explaining it to you, yes, I wish they would have won. But they didn't. And they lost their independence, they lost their freedom, and the Confederacy lost the war. So ultimately, yes, as a Union boy, as a Pennsylvania boy with Pennsylvania descendants, ancestors, yes, great. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not going to throw the Confederates under the bus. I'm not going to throw Lee under the bus. Ultimately, in conclusion, to summarize it all up, the Battle of Gettysburg, as we know now, is one of the most important, decisive battles of the war, of American history in general. And that we, the descendants, we as the future Americans, we should praise everything about it. Not only the blue, not only the gray, but all of it. Lee, Meade, Army of the Potomac, Army Northern Virginia, who cares what it is? Gray, blue, I don't care. It is literally the most perfect, beautiful battle of world history, in my opinion. And ultimately, as a descendant of both sides, I praise it all. I love it all. And I'm proud to be sharing the bloodlines of both Virginia and Pennsylvania at the end of the day. And the men who fought, served, bled, and died on that battlefield called Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys learned something. So anyway, peace out. Have a good day.